Where did Cain get his wife? It's the haunting question that lingers at the edge of every Bible study, rarely addressed, quickly passed over. In a world supposedly populated by only Adam, Eve, and their sons, a woman suddenly appears unnamed, unexplained, and unsettling. Cain, marked by God, cast out as a fugitive, builds a city, but a city requires people, a wife, a family, civilization. So who was she? Where did she come from? And why does the Bible fall silent just when things begin to unravel? Was she his sister, a stranger, a spirit, or something far older than Eden itself? Theologians argue. Mystics whisper. But one thing is certain: she was never supposed to be forgotten. And yet, history almost erased her. Today, we dig into the silence. We chase the shadow of a woman hidden between the lines, because once you see what was buried, you'll never read Genesis the same way again. Genesis 4:17 makes a startling claim. After murdering his brother and being cursed to wander, Cain builds a city and names it after his son. But how could a single man marked as a fugitive, rejected by the ground, suddenly become the founder of urban life? It's a verse that reads more like a riddle than a record. A city implies people, a community, builders, families, labor, infrastructure. But Scripture says Cain had only his parents and a dead brother. So where did this population come from? Was the world already more populated than we assume? Or have we misunderstood the timeline of Genesis? Some scholars suggest the early chapters of Genesis are not strict chronology, but divine poetry, layered, symbolic, compacted. The events may span generations, even parallel lineages, that the text doesn't spell out. Could Cain's city be a sign that humanity was multiplying faster and earlier than the Bible reveals on the surface? Others take a more radical view. They point to the existence of pre-Adamic people, humans created before Adam and Eve, or outside the garden, who were not part of the Edenic covenant. This theory, while controversial, would explain where Cain found his wife and citizens for his city. It would also mean Cain didn't build a city from nothing but inherited a world already in motion. But that opens a darker door. If there were others before Adam, why weren't they mentioned? Were they erased, judged, forgotten? Or were they part of a race that rebelled before Eden was planted? Cain, then, wouldn't just be building a city, he'd be merging two bloodlines, one chosen, one cast out. Even Jewish mystics wrestled with this. The Zohar hints at ancient beings who walked the earth before Adam. Not quite human, not quite angelic, shadows between worlds. Could Cain have mingled with these beings? Could his city have been a union not just of people, but of realms? Cain's curse was to wander, but building a city is the opposite of wandering. It suggests permanence, roots, legacy. Did Cain defy God's judgment, or was he trying to escape it by creating his own kingdom? Outside Eden's reach, was the city an act of rebellion or desperation? And what of the name he chose, Enoch? A name that means dedicated or initiated. Was Cain trying to consecrate something or imitate something sacred he had lost? Naming his city after his son may have been an attempt to rewrite his destiny, to leave a legacy not of murder, but of creation. But the ground still remembered the blood of Abel, and perhaps the city did too. What if the foundations of Cain's city were soaked in violence, built on rebellion, and inhabited by those who bore no name in God's book? A city outside the covenant, a city God never commanded. One verse, one name, and behind it, 1,000 questions. Cain's city is not just a location, it's a mystery, a marker, a crack in the Genesis timeline that suggests we are missing something massive. Not everyone in the beginning walked with God. Some walked away and built cities in the dark. And perhaps, just perhaps, the woman he took as his wife came from that darkness too. Genesis 5:4 drops a quiet bombshell. Adam had other sons and daughters. That's it. No names, no numbers, no stories, just a passing mention. Yet in that one line lies the answer to one of the Bible's greatest riddles. Where did Cain find his wife? The silence isn't accidental, it's strategic. Why does the Bible name Cain, Abel, and Seth, but not the daughters of Eve in ancient cultures? Names carried authority and purpose. To name someone was to give them a role in the divine story. So what does it mean when the daughters are unnamed? Were they hidden to protect or to conceal something deeper? If Cain's wife was his sister, born from Adam and Eve, it would solve the population problem. But it would also raise uncomfortable questions about early humanity. Questions modern readers prefer to avoid. Incest in the beginning. Was it necessity? Was it permitted by God at that time, and later condemned? The early world was different. Genetics were purer. The law of Moses was thousands of years away. But even so, the idea that Cain married his sister stings modern sensibilities. And perhaps that's why her name was lost, hidden behind shame, forgotten through silence, or intentionally removed to preserve an ideal. But what if the issue wasn't incest, but influence? What if Cain's wife carried not just blood, but belief, loyalties, traits, even knowledge from before the fall? If Eve bore daughters after the curse, what spiritual inheritance did they carry? Were they born under grace or judgment? Some ancient sources claim Cain married a woman named Awan, his sister. But in those texts, Awan is more than just a sister. She's a mirror of Cain, marked by exile, burdened by legacy, chosen for a role no one else could fill. Was her union with Cain a match of curses or a merging of destinies? It's easy to imagine Eve weeping over Abel, mourning a son lost and another cursed. But what of her daughters? Did they also grieve? Did they witness the fall of the first family and carry that sorrow into their children? The Bible doesn't say, but silence, too, can speak volumes. Perhaps the daughters were erased because they held power to shape legacy, power to give birth to lines outside the chosen path. And in a world governed by covenants and divine selection, maybe their names would have pointed to stories God chose not to reveal. Or maybe the erasure wasn't divine at all. Maybe it was human, a patriarchal hand, generations later, deciding whose stories were worth preserving. And in that moment, the daughters of Eve faded from the scrolls, but not from the bloodline. Their silence echoes in every name that came after. Cain's wife then becomes more than just a person. She's a symbol, a thread in the unseen fabric of history, a witness to the unraveling of paradise. And whether her name was Awan or something else, she bore the weight of humanity's first fracture, a mother of a new world built on exile. So next time you read Genesis, don't just ask who Cain killed, ask who he loved and why her name never made it onto the page. Hidden among the apocryphal texts lies a book long excluded from most Bibles, the Book of Jubilees, often called the Little Genesis. This ancient Jewish work fills in the gaps left by the canonical narrative. And in it, for the first time, we are given a name for Cain's mysterious wife, Awan. According to Jubilees, Awan was not just Cain's wife, she was his sister, the daughter of Adam and Eve. Their union, though shocking by today's standards, was necessary in a world where humanity was just beginning. But Jubilees does more than name her, It gives her a place, a voice, a role in the cursed legacy. But why was her name preserved in Jubilees and not in Genesis? Why did early Jewish writers dare to speak her identity when Scripture remained silent? Perhaps they understood that without her, the story was incomplete. A city cannot rise without a mother. A bloodline cannot begin without a womb. In naming her, the Book of Jubilees pulls her from the shadows, but it also introduces a haunting possibility. If Awan shared Cain's curse, if she too was exiled, then their offspring were not born of innocence, but of rebellion. Children of the marked, builders of a city God never blessed. This introduces a deeper tension. Was their union a form of survival, or a continuation of defiance? Did they marry to preserve the human race, or to forge their own path outside God's covenant? Jubilees offers no judgment, only a name, but that name changes everything. For generations, Awan's identity was passed down quietly in rabbinic circles, whispered by those who dared to ask forbidden questions. In some traditions, she is linked with sorrow and shame. In others, she is seen as a tragic matriarch forced to carry the consequences of her brother's sin. The Book of Jubilees also suggests that the early world was not as linear as Genesis implies. Time, generations, births, and curses swirl together in a sacred fog. Awan may have been older than we assume, or born after Cain's exile. Her appearance in the narrative depends on how we interpret the silence between verses. And yet, despite its detail, Jubilees was excluded from the official canon. Was it too daring, too revelatory, or did it preserve truths that were considered dangerous for the early church to endorse in denying Awan's presence? Did later editors seek to protect a theological purity at the cost of human history? Even more unsettling is how Jubilees portrays the children of Cain and Awan. Their descendants develop tools, build cities, and shape early civilization. But they also spiral into violence, pride, and vengeance. Was their bloodline gifted, or cursed, creative, or corrupted? The question lingers: did Awan love Cain, or did she follow him out of duty, out of fear, out of divine command? No scripture says. But if she bore his son Enoch, then she bore the weight of both Eden and exile in her womb. A new world, born of loss. Awan, then, becomes more than just a sister-wife. She is the first woman erased, the first woman remembered by those outside the canon. Her silence in Genesis is not absence, it is suppression. And thanks to Jubilees, we hear her name again. Whisper it, remember it. From the union of Cain and Awan came Enoch, not the righteous Enoch who walked with God, but another, born from exile. His name was given to a city, not a prophecy. And from him, a bloodline began, one that would shape early civilization with brilliance and brutality alike. Cain's descendants are not obscure. They are inventors, musicians, craftsmen. Jabal created tents and livestock trade. Jubal pioneered music. Tubal-Cain forged tools of bronze and iron. They were builders, creators, yet none of them are said to walk with God. Their gifts dazzled, but their hearts wandered. Among them arises Lamech, a man of violence and pride. He takes 2 wives, defies the design of Eden, and sings a song of murder, boasting that his vengeance is greater than Cain's. His children are brilliant, but his legacy is soaked in blood. Something dark is moving through the generations. Could it be that Cain's bloodline carried more than just human sin? Some ancient texts suggest Cain was not fathered by Adam at all, but by a fallen being, an entity who seduced Eve and planted rebellion into the first womb. If true, then Awan didn't just marry her brother, she mated with a hybrid of heaven and hell. This theory, controversial as it is, appears in early Jewish and Christian writings. The idea of angelic beings, watchers descending to earth and corrupting humanity, is echoed in Genesis 6. Could Cain have been their first success? A prototype of forbidden fusion, and Awan the unwitting mother of a cursed race. Even the names hint at corruption. Tubal Cain, whose name combines Cain with metallurgy, becomes the first weapon maker. Not just tools, but blades. Not just invention, but destruction. Through this line, violence entered human hands, not just hearts. Cain's descendants were pioneers, but of what kind of world? A world where cities rose fast, but righteousness fell faster. Where creation was unlinked from Creator. Where power was prized over purity. These weren't just children of exile, they were architects of a new, godless order. Was Awan aware of what she birthed? Did she see the seeds of pride, vengeance, and violence grow in her son's eyes? Or did she, like Eve, grieve what her hands could no longer undo? We may never know. But the silence around her only deepens the mystery. This bloodline, brilliant and cursed, vanishes after the flood. None of Cain's descendants are listed on the ark. No trace survives. It's as if God allowed their line to rise, only to sweep it away in a single act of judgment. A forbidden line, erased by water. Yet echoes of their legacy remain. The arts, the tools, the music, they didn't disappear. The spirit of Cain's bloodline may have died in the flesh, but not in culture. We still build cities, we still forge weapons, we still sing songs of pride. Are we too heirs of the forbidden? And so, from Cain and Awan came more than a family. They birthed a current that still flows through human history. A bloodline unblessed, but never forgotten. A path humanity still walks. One invention, one ambition, one rebellion at a time. They were there, every generation had them. Mothers, sisters, wives. Without them, the lineage would collapse. And yet, Scripture almost never names them. From Eve's daughters to Noah's wife, they appear only in shadows, essential to the story, yet written out of the storybook. Why were the women erased? The men are listed by name, role, and years lived. But the women, those who gave birth to nations, are rarely more than a whisper. Could this omission be an act of reverence or of control? Was the silence meant to protect them or to bury their power? In ancient texts, naming meant recognition. It meant calling someone into history. To remain unnamed was to remain unseen. The vanishing of the women isn't just a literary gap, it's a spiritual silence. It suggests that the most vital vessels of life were treated as invisible threads. Some argue it's simply a patriarchal record written by men, for men. But what if it's more than culture? What if this erasure was strategic, designed to obscure a line of women who carried knowledge, spiritual legacy, even dangerous power, women who might threaten the order of things? Cain's wife, Awan, may have been the first erased, but she wasn't the last. What about the wives of Seth, of Enoch, of Lamech? They were mothers to entire generations, yet we don't even know their faces. How can the tree of life grow when half its roots are hidden? Perhaps this is why women in Scripture often appear suddenly, powerfully, like Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. When they're finally named, it's because they altered destiny. Could it be that many others, just as influential, were stripped from the record before their names could take root? Even the language changes. Adam knew Eve, but the knowing is unidirectional. We never hear Eve's voice after Seth is born. It's as though she fulfills her role and fades into narrative mist. The story marches forward, but her footsteps vanish from the path. The silence around the women might be divine mystery or human censorship. Either way, it has consequences. We inherit a story with missing pieces. The feminine lineage is like a lost river, its course felt but unseen. Its power still flows, but we no longer know where it began. Yet their legacy survives not in names, but in what was built. Cities, songs, sons. The women are hidden in the fruit of what followed. Every generation that shaped the earth was born from an unnamed womb. Their absence in ink does not erase their presence in flesh. So what happens when we remember them? When we question the silences and seek the voices behind the veils? The narrative shifts, the lens widens, the spiritual weight redistributes. And suddenly, Cain's wife is no longer an afterthought. She becomes the first in a long line of forgotten matriarchs. Long before printing presses and modern theology, stories traveled by word, fire, and blood. And though Genesis whispers little of Cain's wife, other ancient cultures echoed her presence. Strangely, they too spoke of mysterious women, dark, powerful, often dangerous, who birthed nations from exile and fire. In Mesopotamian lore, the goddess Lilith was not just Adam's first wife. She was a defiant spirit, cast out, who took lovers from among demons and birthed ghostly children. While not found in Genesis, Jewish folklore later connects her to the chaos before Eve and possibly to Cain's lineage. The parallels grow deeper. Sumerian myths tell of women birthed from the gods, abandoned to earth, bearing hybrid offspring. In some traditions, the first cities weren't built by men alone, but by unions between divine beings and mortal women. Could Cain's wife, then, be part of this ancient memory? Ethiopian traditions preserved in the Book of Adam suggest Cain married a woman from outside Eden, a being not fully human. Some describe her as radiant, others as monstrous. If these accounts hold even a sliver of truth, Cain's wife becomes a bridge between realms, not merely between people. In Greek mythology, Pandora is the first woman, created after man's rebellion. She opens a box that releases evil into the world. Some see in her a reflection of Awan, the first to bear the consequences of another's curse. A feminine figure tied not to sin, but to consequence and change. Across Africa and the Middle East, stories abound of first women born in darkness or banished from light. They are often unnamed, yet central to the survival of their people. These echoes may not agree on detail, but they resonate with the same haunting theme: the erased woman who bore civilization. Some scholars believe these cross-cultural legends represent a shared trauma: the violent break from paradise, the rise of early cities, the confusion of bloodlines, and at the center of that trauma stands a woman part mother, part myth, always just beyond the record. Could these myths be corrupted memories of Cain's wife, echoes of a single, silenced figure whose story was too dangerous, too complex to remain untouched? The further we look from Genesis, the clearer her outline becomes. Not in scripture, but in shadow. Even in Gnostic texts, the feminine divine appears again and again: Sophia, the one who fell into matter; Eve, the bearer of light; Nema, the seductress of watchers. These women aren't just side characters, they are catalysts. So was Cain's wife among them. The idea is unsettling and liberating. Because if Cain's wife appears in every corner of myth and memory, then her silence in Genesis is not absence, it's censorship. She lives on, not in name, but in archetype, not in chapter and verse, but in the pulse beneath them. To find her, we must read not only the Bible, but the world, the whispers of ancient tongues, the broken songs of lost tribes. In them, her story continues waiting to be heard again, not erased, only hidden. She was never meant to be seen, not in ink, not in voice, just a faint echo behind a city, a child, a curse. Cain's wife, silent, nameless, buried in a single sentence. But behind that veil stood a woman who shaped the future of the world more than we'll ever know. She was the first to join her life with exile, the first to give birth outside Eden's gates. Her womb became the beginning of a new world, one born not of paradise, but of consequence. And yet, her name did not survive the canon, but her legacy did. Through her came the city of Enoch, the descendants who shaped early art, industry, and invention. Through her, Cain's mark echoed into generations. Though her name was silenced, her blood became civilization's foundation. Her role erased but never undone. And perhaps that was the point. Her presence was too powerful, too confusing. She did not fit the neat categories of good or evil, chosen or cursed. She was both the bride of a killer and the mother of a future. She was complexity in a world that wanted simplicity. But now, we remember her, not as a footnote, but as a figure of deep mystery. Whether her name was Awan or something lost to time, her absence is a wound in the text and her reappearance is a reckoning. She demands that we read more carefully, ask harder questions. Her story reminds us that Scripture has edges, places where silence hides truth, that not all who shape destiny are remembered, and that sometimes the forgotten carry more weight than the ones who were named. She is the patron of the erased, the hidden matriarch of human history, and she is not alone. For every named prophet, there was a woman who believed. For every warrior, a woman who bled. For every curse, a womb that bore its consequence. The Bible may not name them all, but heaven remembers. And perhaps now, so do we. Cain's wife was never just a wife. She was the turning point between paradise and pain, between God's breath and man's rebellion, between what was holy and what would never be whole again. She was the bridge we were never taught to cross. You remembered her today. You gave breath to her silence, and that matters more than you know, because every forgotten figure who rises again reclaims a part of the story that was stolen. Cain's wife lives in your awareness now, and that makes her powerful again. For generations, Cain's wife remained a ghost in the pages, present, yet invisible. But today, her story rises, not because it was newly written, but because someone dared to ask. The moment we challenge the silence, the truth begins to breathe again. She is not just a mystery solved, she is a mirror of how history is shaped, how stories are chosen, how power is protected. When a woman who birthed a bloodline can be buried in half a verse, what else have we lost between the lines? But now, you've remembered her. In doing so, you've honored every voice that was once silenced. This isn't just about Cain's wife, it's about reclaiming what was erased, reviving what was buried, and restoring what was once deemed too complex for the page. If this truth stirred something in you, let it speak. Comment "I remember her" below, and be part of restoring the forgotten. Share this story with someone who thinks they've read the Bible cover to cover, because there's always more hidden in plain sight. And if you're hungry for more mysteries, more voices lost to time, more pages the world tried to tear out, subscribe. This is only the beginning. The next revelation is already whispering. Don't miss it.